So good afternoon to everyone. So thanks a lot for being here for the seminar of Paolo Rosso. So Paolo is a full professor of Universitat Politècnica de València. So Paolo is very, very well known in the NLP community for all his works on detecting harmful information in social media, as well as disinformation detection and hate speech. And I think that he will talk about one of his several projects he's currently coordinating on the topic. So once again, thanks, Paolo, for accepting to be here.
Fake news, conspiracy theories. Actually, I mean, fake news is a fashionable term, but we shouldn't talk about fake news. We should distinguish between disinformation, when false information is spread intentionally to harm someone, and misinformation, when false information is spread maybe via satire, but not necessarily to harm someone. But anyway, it's a fashionable term, and we keep on using it. So, apart from saying something that we have been working on, I was more interested at the beginning to frame a little bit the problem from a European Union perspective. So, is considering disinformation, especially the problem of disinformation, is considered as an information warfare. And there is a discontinuous foreign manipulation and the interference, especially from abroad. So I will tell you something about what is done. Maybe some of you, many of you are already aware of it, but it's important to say what is done at the European Union level, and concretely from the European Digital Media Observatory perspectives. There are different hubs in Europe that deal with the problem of disinformation, how to detect disinformation, how to analyze, how to, inform citizens about this. In the several languages, we are in one hub that covers Spanish and Portuguese, and of course there is one hub related to the disinformation problem in French. If I remember properly, behind there is the French Association Press, and then University from Paris, University Paris, Pantheon, okay. Then I would like to tell you something about the role of emotion, how people that spread disinformation play with emotions in order to try to trigger certain emotions when we read false information. And concretely, I will share with you a work that I would have liked not to have done, because it's related to the terrible floods we had in Valencia at the end of October. We analyzed tweets and TikTok videos, and in order to see how certain malicious actors, let's call them this way, played with our emotions, spreading false information. And at the end, I will talk a little bit about conspiracy theories, concretely about a challenge, a shared task we organize at PAN as a task, and what are the narratives that are behind, and so on. So it's the data set is available both in English, and one part is in English and one part in Spanish, and actually something that we didn't do and that could be done by someone of you is working on the argument from the argumentation perspective, seeing what are the different way that support, a conspiracy theory or a critical, critical thinking about this problem. And moreover, I've heard that the next PhD defense will be on argumentation by show, no? The show must go on, so yes. Right, so what happens at European level, European Union level? There is the European External Action Service that deals with this disinformation problem. And so this foreign information manipulation and interference, so they basically focus on informations that it's not completely false, but it's harmful for sure. It's not illegal, but it's a borderline and it's manipulative, intentional, and coordinated, as I said, especially from abroad. And they try to early detect this false information, this concrete disinformation, because this is done with the intention to harm someone, our Western democracies. Clearly speaking, and to understand what are the tactics, techniques, and procedures. And since 2020, the end of 2020, there is an action plan from the European Union in order to fight against disinformation. Yeah, well, at the time I attended a seminar organized by the European Union. Actually, it was 1.5 years ago, more or less, and if I remember properly, they were monitoring more than 600 channels, and most of them from Russian media. And some of them also from China, but mainly from Russia, and of course with the attempt to create a polarization in Western democracy. We have experienced this during especially referendum or attempts of referendums like in Catalonia, in Spain, like in a national election and so on. All right, this is, this is the result of a study done in the framework of one of these hubs I told you, actually the one that, deals with disinformation in Spanish in Portugal, and they studied how is perceived disinformation as a problem in Europe. You can, it's a little bit old, a couple of years old, but you can see that is perceived by in many countries like a problem. In France, for instance, it was 85% of people perceive disinformation as a problem. Even more in some others, UK, of course, they experience Brexit, for instance. In Spain, probably you have something similar in France. Also, the National Department of Security, consider disinformation campaigns that come from abroad a problem, an information warfare, and they try to coordinate some works. We were also involved, also from an artificial intelligence perspective, how these techniques can be used in order to spread disinformation, but also how they can be used in order to detect deepfakes, etc. In our Congress of Deputies in Spain, there is a specific office, the Office of Science and Technology of the Congress of Deputies, that try to make Spanish politicians aware about the fact that disinformation could be a boomerang. So it could have an impact on how people trust politicians at the end. Okay, this is the theory, but to be honest with you, sometimes I have the feeling that certain parties, also in Spain, talking about Spain, actually play with spreading disinformation. But okay, this is the world we live. Right, so the European Digital Media Observatory, these hubs that are organized in the different languages in order to fight disinformation in the different languages. And the task force that they organize from time to time, especially before election, like it happened before the last European elections. This is the hub we belong to. Actually, this is the previous project. Now is over, and there is a 3-year continuation of the project. Many university fact checkers, companies, journalists, economists. So it's, of course, an interdisciplinary problem that needs to be addressed from an interdisciplinary perspective. Right, so as I told you, for instance, before the last European election, EDMO organized a task force. So the aim was to let citizens know about some false information that were arriving from abroad with the goal of polarizing the European Union voters with the risk that certain extreme parties could take advantage of this false information. And for instance, many of them were about Ukrainians, so anti-Ukrainian disinformation. You can imagine from where they arrived, and because they had the narrative that was pro-Russia, and they had an anti-European Union sentiment, and concretely this message was pretty common in Spain, in Italy, and in the Netherlands and many other European Union countries. Then, of course, Muslims. So other messages containing false information were against Muslims. For instance, saying that in Spain the Holy Week is very important. There are a lot of celebrations, saying that they consider the Holy Week offensive in comparison to them. And of course, this was false. Then a group of messages were against contain false claims about the LGBTQ community, and that the European Union wanted to impose a surrogacy, etc., etc. And the last but not least, with respect to climate change, that now seems that is not so popular anymore, especially with all these changes starting from US. But yes, there were in these messages also conspiracy theories mentioned, etc., etc. So basically, in this seminar, many of the members of these hubs I mentioned, starting from ours, attended. They try at Edmond level, they try to share what were the narratives common in these groups of false group of messages containing false information that were spread just before the European Union elections against Ukraine, that Russian invasion was justified, that there was a genocide in Donbass, that NATO was directly involved in the conflict, Zelensky, Nazi, drug addicted, etc., corrupted, etc. Especially they tried to spread the anti-European Union sentiment, saying that Ukrainian refugees were a parasite taking advantage of our welfare systems. Talking about climate change, that it was an excuse, for instance, to reduce our freedom. Probably in the next future we'll experience a climate lockdown, and these renewable electric vehicles are dangerous, that the climate movement is hypocrites, and a lot of conspiracy theories were behind this. LGBTQ, again, they are pedophile violence and mentally sick, etc., etc. And then at the time of this seminar started the Israel-Hamas war. So, there were also, certain narratives about the war that unfortunately the two wars are still on, no matter the blah blah, the promises of, Trump, etc. So, of course, in these false, these messages that contain false information, they play with our emotions. And so I will share you some works that maybe you know already. So probably one of the most famous one is the work carried out at MIT, where colleagues show already 7 years ago, that in Twitter, messages containing false information, especially triggered emotion like fear, disgust, and surprise. Surprise, of course, because we receive so many messages that we need to be surprised for clicking on the message. Then what they want to trigger also fear, disgust, in order to foster this polarization, this anti-European, for instance, sentiments, or anti-immigrants, depending on the target of the messages. And then also they empirically show that messages containing false information spread faster, 6 or 7 times faster than the ones that instead contain truthful information. Like this was at the time of the US presidential election between, so there was Hillary Clinton and already Trump. And so there was this false information that spread on Twitter that Hillary Clinton was involved in this mastermind, criminal mastermind, child sex ring, etc. So, I mean, surprise, what's going on in our country, where we are the best democracy in the world, and then fear, wow, I mean, and then disgust, of course. With the former PhD students of ours, we analyze, of course, it's not that, messages containing false information trigger this, emotion from the beginning till the end. Of course, these emotions are triggered especially at the beginning of the message, because it's when the reader, could be interested in knowing more about the message. And so here you have an example, and there are the Plutchik emotions, and certain words at the beginning are especially related to emotions to the emotions I mentioned before. So incident, accidentally, not to surprise. Then the dark green, fear, hospital, kill, and so on. And then during the rest of the news, not necessarily, all negative emotions are triggered, but especially at the beginning, this is the case. So we are talking about, experiments done in the pre-LLMs era. So we are talking about 5 years ago, but it looks like we are talking about the dinosaur epoch, but okay. So we wanted we weren't the only one, of course, but we also wanted to take into account what was empirically shown by these colleagues at MIT. So we integrated in a word embedding architecture, concretely, LSTM that are not fashionable anymore. We didn't want just to encode the words via word embedding, but also to somehow being able to model emotions, taking into account different affective resources. And concretely here, we were interested in distinguishing between truthful information, so real news, and false news, not necessarily disinformation, because as you see, we have a satire, we have clickbaits, and so on and so forth. And we carry out experiments on a couple of data sets, on Twitter and news articles. Of course, experiments results were better on news articles, because you have more words, more information to process. And the takeaway message is that if you compare, for instance, the results with just a deep learning technique that in whose architecture the affective resources weren't integrated, results were lower than when instead all the affective resources were integrated. So somehow the enhanced deep learning architecture was able to model the emotions that were triggered in this text. So something like this, nothing more than numbers, but the takeaway message is this one. Emotions need to be taken into account. And talking about emotions, yes, the emotions, some malicious actors played with our emotions in Valencia at the time of the flood. So we analyze tweets and TikTok videos that fact-check companies like Maldita, Verifica, and Neutral, okay, Spanish fact-checkers. Discriminated, so they fact-checked saying, okay, this is false, this is actually true. And we wanted to see if integrating certain characteristics in transformers and the large language models actually help in discriminating, okay, this is a TikTok video containing false information, this is not, and the same Twitter. So what we have seen is that actually the emotions that were triggered in the tweets and the TikTok videos containing false information were different. Mainly in X, sadness and fear was a trigger, and in TikTok, anger and disgust. In TikTok, they play also with, of course, voice, music, and images. And in both, they refer to personal anecdotes or they refer to family members that actually they were there. They have seen all the dead people and that the authorities don't want us to know, etc. And also we realized that what are the malicious actors? What were malicious actors? Pseudo-journalists, people that in order to gain some popularity were ready to share all the false information as possible. Political activists of extreme parties, influencers. Also, there were influencers that said, what do you want me today to talk about? The new cream, but this is not a joke. Or the last news in Valencia, and so, okay, a lot of likes, so, okay, they gain popularity, who cares, at what price? You have here just an example in Twitter. I've just been informed that 86, I was informed, believe me, that 86 deceased have already been removed from the Bonaire parking. Actually, at the end, not a single person was found dead in this parking, but there was the fear that many could have been found dead there. And the shopping center parking has 5,700 spaces. So, this information triggers you. You can imagine, a certain fear, okay? And instead, the ones that didn't contain false information, of course, reported about facts. I don't know here, who knows if it is possible to listen. Bah. Yes. So you can. So they play with the music that already this music doesn't make you feel happy, and so I'm the only one seeing a skull, and here, for instance. So, emotionally touched, okay, Benjamin is able to understand Spanish. But it's a cemetery, and we weren't told, but so it's very hard, and so on and so forth. So, they play with these techniques. Someone, they son of bitch, they needed to pay. Who are the son of bitch? This is a big deal. We are still discussing in Valencia. In my opinion, the local politicians that were in charge of keeping an eye on what was going on. But some extreme parties believe the central government. But anyway, this is, okay, well, we skip it. So just to give you an idea about the topic, the words, talking about Twitter, the ones that, the tweets that, the post in X that share disinformation talk about the government. But what government? The local one or the central one? Well, it seems that they refer to the central one. Of course, park in Bonaire, Valencia, people dead, the dam, because one of the rumors was that the dam was, potentially could have happened, but it didn't happen, that there is a dam just closer to Valencia that was closer to break. And unfortunately, it didn't happen because a technician went there, they opened the dam and so on, but this rumor was already spread. And then a conspiracy theory like a HARP are behind it. This happened because of this. Instead, of course, the post in X that didn't contain false information, they say, oh, okay, no, don't worry, this is false, this is a conspiracy, this is a political activist, Vito Quiles, that spread the disinformation, and so on and so forth. What happened? Okay, I mentioned someone I shouldn't have mentioned. Oh no, it's not true. You didn't do anything wrong. Okay. So what was interesting, I hope you don't ask me about this because I don't have a clue, but my student has. I mean, students are important, as you know, because you are majority. And is very much into audio features, so he integrated in the transformer model some of these, actually all these features, in order to take into account and in order to be able to discriminate with respect to the TikToks in video if they contain false information or they didn't, the noise of the sound, the loudness of the audio, the brightness of the sound, and harmonic elements, the music somewhere. It's the link to emotional tones, the difference in amplitude, the tonal harmonic relationship and musical natures, because different, actually in the one that didn't contain false information, basically there was no music, but certainly specific music, as you notice, was used in order to trigger some fear, some disgust, some negative emotions, and etc. Okay, so actually these audio features showed to be quite effective at the time of discriminating videos in TikTok containing false information and not. So yes, in order to emphasize this tonal variation, this emotional depth, you notice in the audio of the second example, the harmonic complexity, and then, as I show you, some manipulative musical elements. And instead, in the one that talk about the facts, basically there was more a monotone narrative style and the brighter tones, less usually noisy, etc. So experiments were done with well-known transformer like Roberta, and with audio features it was possible to obtain an accuracy of 0.76. And with respect to TikTok, and then he also used GPT-4, and with a few shots, and he obtained an accuracy slightly higher, but on average on both on post of X and TikTok video. And actually, talking about the GPT-4, it showed to have a substantial agreement with the manual annotation made in advance by fact checkers, because remember we use this post of X and this TikTok video that previously fact checkers of these fact checking companies fact checked. So this contains false information, this doesn't contain. So actually there was a pretty high agreement, Cohen kappa of nearly 0.7. Right. And the last, yes, in a quarter of an hour or so, something about conspiracy theory. So we have seen that also in the floods that we experience In Valencia, some conspiracy theory were mentioned because at the end, behind all the problems, it seems to have a conspiracy theory. Some years ago, together with a social psychologist, some linguist, we decided to carry out some work, not especially in order to detect a conspiracy theory. There were already, there was already a good bunch of work on that. But the aim was discriminating between critical thinking and conspiracy theory. One thing is saying, at the time of coronavirus, actually we focus on that. We work with the telegrams, and so we wanted to discriminate, understand if there was a criticism about, they didn't experience, they didn't practice so much with the vaccine, so I'm a little bit anxious and so on. They should have spent more time, for instance. Then, now we'll have a microchip, and I will be, everybody will know, actually the ones that are behind will know what I will be doing and so on. So it's not necessary to define what a conspiracy theory is, but just in case, basically are causal explanation that of significant events that present them as a result of covert plots orchestrated by secret, powerful and malicious groups. And usually they trigger once more emotion, but especially emotions like anger. And we came across to many of them during COVID-19. Then I'm sure you have heard about some others, QAnon, related to Satanism and pedophilia. So this is the conspiracy theory behind that, the assault of a Capitol, for instance. Green tyranny, so they wanted to cut rights and freedoms. We have seen some of this narrative in the example I show you that Edmo, in these messages that Edmo tried to analyze and to make citizens aware of just before the last European Union election. Greater replacements of Christians by Muslims, the Great Reset, so they wanted to control the population, and then the mother of all the conspiracy theory, the secret Jewish plan. So this is more or less. There was an interesting, there are many others, but maybe these are among the most well-known conspiracy theories. There was an interesting study done by UNESCO already 5 years ago. So they analyzed 5 million of Reddit comments, and actually they realized that only 5% of users were conspiracy theorists. So you could say, okay, this is not a big deal, just 5%. Yes, you're right, but in this study they showed that they wrote 64% of comments. So if our large language models learn from data, if a majority, in this example of Reddit comments, support conspiracy theories, we have a problem, okay? And actually, they show that the most active user wrote nearly 900K words, so the double of the length of The Lord of the Rings, just to give you a comparison. Okay, this talking about Italians, a lot of Italians in the audience, so I needed to talk a little bit about the work done by an Italian in the framework of her PhD, by the way, in Pisa. By the way, no, it wasn't with Felice Dorletta, it was with Tesconi. And so basically, yeah, once more, she addressed the problem taking into account emotions, the Plotchik 8 emotion categories, I also showed you before. Sentiment, the personality traits that before was possible to consider with the usage of IBM personality insights, and now is not available anymore. But this tool allows you to have an idea about the personality, so the big 5 traits, the 5 values, and the 12 needs. And then, of course, also certain categories, affected categories pronouns, cognitive, related to cognitive process, informal language, and so on, of the Luke tool that many of you will know, I'm sure. So she showed very, let's say, well, logical findings in the sense that, for instance, well, she compared conspiracy theories with random users. So conspiracy, so the red ones, talking about personality traits were less stable, okay? Then more curious, somehow, sometimes they are very curious. They come up with some theory that you need very curious. You need to be very curious. And then also they use to use more swear words. Not at the beginning, but when they don't succeed convincing you, because they know the truth. So if you don't believe them, sometimes they start to use aggressive language, hate speech, explicit. Okay? Right, then other logical findings, the bio of these conspiracy theories in terms of words is smaller. They don't have a lot of say about their life, apart from being conspiracy theories. The entropy of the number of unique words, so they use, in simple words, they use less words on average because they are very focused on the same stuff, so they talk about the same. The reply rate is higher. They are always there ready to reply. And we also try to address this problem with a postdoc we had in our group some years ago. And actually it was funny because, I mean, she was the one actually, to be honest, that she proposed we were working on disinformation detection, and she proposed that we should investigate conspiracy theories. But coronavirus didn't start yet at the time, but was just at the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020. Actually, you don't see among the hashtags we use coronavirus, because yes, it was there, but we didn't know yet. So we use anti-vax, vaccine cause autism, etc., etc. We address the problem from a profiling viewpoint. So given a feed of tweets of conspiracy theorists or anti-conspiracy one, we wanted to try to profile, of course, getting rid later of these hashtags that we use at the time of extracting the tweets via the API when it was possible. And then it was a matter to profile the user as a conspiracy theorist or not. Right, and logical, of course, things that you have always to do when you collect a data set, to have a look before going to GitHub and just clicking on one of the many models and running some experiments, just to analyze the data set. And of course, some logical conclusions or logical findings. Also in our case, propagators had less followers, because they create newer accounts and many accounts, but they don't have such old accounts, and they use more swear words. And we analyze tweets related to propagators of a conspiracy theory, and they talk on average more about religion. And actually, if you remember, behind the QAnon movement at the time of the assault of the Capitol, they believe, and they still believe, that Trump was sent by God in order to save them from Joe Biden. And so the religion was there, I mean, in many of these tweets. All right? Pre-large language models era, like in this case. And the takeaway message is basically the same. We integrated not only affective features, but also information of a personality, from Luke, of sentiment, and so on. In this case, the deep learning technique, architecture that in this case gave us the best result, CNN, in the case of integrating disinformation, allow to obtain better results. As you can see, I mean, the results are not very high, but were statistically significant with respect to when disinformation wasn't integrated in the architecture. Right, of course, as I told you before, there were many other people working on conspiracy theory, and in this case on conspiracy theory detection in the period of COVID-19, and some colleagues from Norway, we were talking about Norway before, organized a shared task at Medieval 2022, and basically it was a matter to understand if a certain conspiracy theory was supported, mentioned, or not mentioned, and the problem had to be addressed, taking into account just the textual information of tweets, or also the graph structure of the tweets, the way they were propagated. So we participated with some postdoc and the PhD students, and just in the first task where the textual information of these tweets were considered in a very simple way, using an ensemble of a BERT and trying to augment some data with the help at that time of a GPT-3. And yes, I mean, we obtained decent results. These are actually, we obtained the best results. These are the best teams. We use also graph and neural networks, but they didn't help much. Right. Of course, if you have, you know, transformers or an ensemble of transformers, maybe, I mean, train on a conspiracy theory. This is, I mean, ideal because you can get better results. And but otherwise, of course, I mean, just using a large language model in the zero shot doesn't give you a great performance. So you can try to improve the performance in a few shot way, passing some examples, but also the definition of the categories, but automatically generated. But if the definition, we noticed that if the definition were provided by experts, and in our case we had some linguists and psychologists involved, so human written definition, actually it was possible to obtain higher results, and not so good like in the case of you know, an ensemble of transformer trained on conspiracy theory data, but still better than just zero shot or a few shot without providing human written definition. So definition matters. There are other shared tasks that have been organized talking about conspiracy theory related to COVID-19, but I have already talked a lot, maybe just 5 minutes or something, 5 or 7 minutes more if I can, because there are interesting works published at the top conferences where Benjamin is used to publish, like ACL. And so this is an interesting work of some years ago, 3 years ago. And basically, these colleagues provide this, the focus is, or you are with me as a conspiracy theorist, or you are against me. So the friend-enemy schema, the outsider-insider. So they focus on the social identity theory. So basically, we need to belong to a group. And so, okay, and the conspiracy theories play with that, try to actually make some skeptical people belong to their community. That's why we, as I'll show you in a while, try to address the problem, the important problem of discriminating between critical thinkers and conspiracy theories, because otherwise it's putting everybody in the same bag and you make a favor to conspiracy theorists. But I'm not an expert, but our social psychologist said that, okay, this work, no matter published in top conferences. Sometimes, there are things that are not always clear, subtle, implicit, and the same here. Actions, actor, consequences, objectives. So they weren't very happy, 100% happy of this work. That's why they decided to focus on discrimination of these two group of critical thinkers and conspiracy theorists, to try to understand, moreover, something more about the narrative, to work at the span level. So, we have a text in Telegram, but what is the span related to? For instance, what are the actors? What are the facilitator? What are the victims? What are the campaigners? And so they propose, but I have to be honest, they propose these categories, so agents, so actors, objectives, consequences, victims, campaigners that no matter critical thinkers or conspiracy theories are those that oppose the mainstream narrative, facilitators that in the case of conspiracy theories are those that help propagating conspiracy theories. In the case of critical thinkers are those that implement a measure dictated by the authorities, no matter maybe they are not very convinced. You can have an idea of what I'm talking about. You have two texts of telegrams that were tagged, one as a conspiracy theory and the other one as a critical thinking. So there is the focus is on discriminating in these oppositional narratives, conspiracy theory and critical thinking. You can see, for instance, conspiracy theory, the actors, Bill Gates, the private owner World Health Organization. In the other case, the actors, the White House Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci. I don't know. Yes, facilitators here, hospitals, here the media, and victims, people, and the victims, nurses, doctors, and other healthcare providers. So this, of course, was tagged by some linguists and social psychologists. They took 1 year in order to tag this 10,000 manually, 10,000 fragments in English and in Spanish. So actually this is the data set that if you want you can play with from an argumentation viewpoint, because we didn't do anything. We just carry out some experiments with transformers in order to, discriminating between conspiracy theory, critical thinking, and also in order to see what was the F measure. Actually, we use span F1 that is takes into account the proportion of overlapping characters in the fragments along all the categories, and there are categories that are more difficult to detect, to be detected than others. Okay, tables of numbers this time of the afternoon are always boring, but so it's doable. Things can be improved, even if it doesn't seem so difficult discriminating between a critical thinker and conspiracy theories. But certainly for certain categories whose number of samples weren't so high, it was difficult to obtain a decent performance. You can see, for instance, 0 facilitators, 0.45, so it's a little bit low. So indeed, later we organized a challenge in the Pan Lab at CLE with this data set that is composed of 10,000 messages in Telegram, half of them in English and the other half in Spanish. Well, the first task was discriminating between the two elements of oppositional thinking, so conspiracy theory and critical thinkers. And we used the Matthews correlation coefficient in order to evaluate the 82 teams that participated, and then the second task was a matter to identify the text span where these categories were mentioned. So what were the agents, the facilitators, the victims, and so on. Okay, we'll skip all this because it's late. Just once more, it was interesting to see that actually to have a snapshot of the data set that you can use it, you can ask and use it. So talking about agent, okay, in English, well, they talk about this deep state behind everything, gate, not that one, Bill, and pharma and the many conspiracy theories there. Instead, among the text of telegrams that were written by critical thinkers, yeah, they were worried about, they mentioned these companies, Pfizer, Moderna, what were the rules maybe imposed by government, Biden, Fauci, and so it's the focus was different. The worries of people were different. And as you can see, talking about emotions, more anger, more disgust among, the text written by the critical thinkers. And even if it's not a show, using Hertlex, it was possible to notice that more hurtful, more hate speech, explicit, was used in the text written by the critical thinkers. Many 82 participants, among the best teams, there were teams that fine-tune some large language models like Llama, like GPT 3.5, an ensemble of transformers in the first task and also in the second task. So basically, this is everything I wanted to tell you. I would like to finish with something said by another Italian, Brandolini. The Brandolini's law, H, the bullshit asymmetry principle. So the amount of energy needed to refute something stupid is greater than the needed to generate it. So this is the case of hate speech, the case of disinformation, so the two sides of the harmful information. But this is our goal, to try to address disinformation and the hate speech, of course, with always, at least this is what I believe, a human-centric AI, from a human-centric AI perspective. So we have to rely on these large language models, but we always need to keep an eye on analyze the results that these models provide. Merci.